The marriage between David Justice and Halle Berry was very, very short. But for a significant period in the 1990s, they were one of the power couples that the media, especially Black media, loved to talk about. I mean, after all, he was a young baseball player that won Rookie of the Year in 1990 for a team that was on the brink of winning the World Series, and she was this star actress on the rise. Their love story seemed like a fairy tale, a dream couple destined for a happily ever after. But behind the glamorous facade, the cracks began to show. There was public scrutiny, accusations, and a lot of unhealed wounds that all played a part in their shockingly short-lived union. And of course, in a second, I will tell you all about it. But first, if you're new in the pews, this is I Will Tell You What, a podcast that's all of Black history. I Will Tell You What is presented by Hueido, and I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that tells you these love stories every single Monday. So don't forget to become an official All Runner on Patreon, subscribe on the tube of Hugh, or listen wherever you get your podcast. And don't forget to follow us everywhere for more love and more Black history. So now, with all of that being said, you've been cordially invited to another episode in our Booze and Baseball series, the love story of David Justice and Halle Berry. Did David Justice cause Halle Berry to be mostly deaf in her left ear? Did he really ask for alimony in their divorce? Was their entire marriage a publicity stunt like that one singer and that one tight end? But if you're like me, you remember more about their divorce than their actual marriage. But before I tell you how it all ended, I do want to start at the beginning of their love story. So David and Halle did not meet at a party or at an award show or wherever celebrities meet each other in the early 1990s, but through the television. It was February 1992, and Halle was watching TV when she saw this baseball player come across the screen. His name was announced, David Justice, and while she didn't know who that was, she clocked that he was finer than a mug. Because honestly, David Justice is one of those quintessential light skins of the 1990s. You know, the 90s were the era of the Will Smiths, the Shamar Moores, the Eric LaSalles, the Grant Hills, and the David Justices. It's why so many today are drawn to Jalen Hurts, is because he reminds us of a time where God was putting his entire foot in whatever recipe he made to create aesthetically pleasing brights of the light. They simply do not make them like that anymore. So after Halle watched that episode of Rock and Jock, she pocketed his name for later. According to a Sports Illustrated article, Halle brought him up while chatting with a homeboy. Since seeing him on TV, she had him on her mind like all the time. Sports journalist John Ed Bradley wrote, quote, "She tells her friend about a scheme she has dreamed up. She's going to meet this David Justice. She's going to go to a game down there in Atlanta and make his acquaintance somehow. She'll finagle something through the studio, some kind of appearance. She was about to do it again, and her friend knew it. Halle said that before David, she, quote, would look to men for acceptance and reassurance. She so desperately wanted to heal her daddy issues that she allowed herself, quote, to get in some strange relationships. Like that one with that one actor, or this other relationship where an ex stole a rollie and a pair of diamond earrings from her, and this other relationship where an ex hit her so hard in her left ear that she needed a hearing aid. So, knowing how Halle would do, her friend told her, quote, "Don't go chasing after a man, let love find you." And well, Halle ended up letting well enough alone until a little while later when, during an interview, this journalist mentioned that his friend, David Justice, wanted an autograph. Now, let me remind you that then she wasn't quite Halle Berry, but a slim, thick, caramel-skinned 5'5", rising star actress. She was jazzy. Real ones know that's way past fine. She had been on shows like Amen and A Different World and in movies like Jungle Fever and Strictly Business. She was starting to promote Boomerang, which would come out that summer. Black Hollywood is small, so it made sense that David knew who she was. Also, Halle's from Cleveland and David's from Cincinnati. Folks from Ohio always know who else is from Ohio, or at least according to the handful of Ohio people I know. Because on the other hand, David, a right fielder for the Atlanta Braves, was Rookie of the Year 2 years before. The Braves were a team that was growing in optimism and felt like they were almost there to reaching and winning the coveted World Series. And spoiler alert, they were. But anyway, Bradley also wrote that David wasn't a well-liked player by the fan base. Quote, the list of grievances against Justice included both the petty and the not-so-petty. He wants to be called David, not Dave. He often refuses to sign autographs. He rarely has a hello or a kind word for anyone in the clubhouse. He parks his car wherever he pleases, including in no parking zones. He owns a small computer and keeps a file on it containing a sort of enemies list of sports writers to whom he will never speak again. And truthfully, Halle didn't care about all that, so when the journalist told her that David wanted her autograph, she passed along her phone number instead. In 1992, David wanted Halle's autograph and instead ended up with her phone number. He called her on his car phone on the ride home after work. They talked until he made it home, and once he got inside, he called her back and they talked for 3 more hours. He told Ebony magazine in 1993 that, quote, it was the best conversation I had ever had with a woman. They met in person 2 weeks later when David got her a first-class ticket to Atlanta and a hotel room for a quick trip so he could take her out on a date. When David landed his eyes on her in Hartsville, he didn't need to see no ID. He knew that must be Halle Berry, and Halle Berry was going to be, quote, his wife. Quote, I knew when I first saw her that I was going to marry her. It was like I heard a voice. And was, because Halle proposed to David. Yes, you heard that right. Halle proposed to David. And for what it's worth, he said, quote, I knew I was going to marry her. I just wanted to propose on a special date. I was shooting for her birthday, but before I could surprise her, she surprised me. So a few months later, on New Year's Day, 1993, David and Halle got married in his living room around 1:30 a.m. They were both 26, though back then, I suppose Halle was saying she was 24. Halle wore a white sparkly sequin halter mini dress with a train attached, and David wore a black tuxedo. Their moms were in the wedding too. Quote, Judy Berry was the maid of honor, and David's mother, Nettie Justice, was the best woman. They honeymooned in the Caribbean and upon return seemed instantly thrust into the limelight as a power couple. Magazines like Ebony and Jet were eager to get a profile of their newest favorite duo. Jet reported in 1994 when they purchased a home in Los Angeles, it was quoted that they, quote, go rollerblading every day. They quickly were being positioned as this perfect Hollywood couple, but the reality was that their careers came first. They clearly had a mismatch in priorities. David was mostly in Atlanta and Halle was mostly in Los Angeles. Quote, I watch him on television every night and see how he's playing. This wouldn't work though. In early 1996, so a little more than 3 years of being married, David and Halle announced they were divorcing. From Halle's team came this statement, quote, it is with sadness that I announce that Dave Justice and I have decided to end our marriage. I live a very public life, but this is a painful and private situation that I am not prepared to discuss. David confirmed it too during spring training, quote, it's something that has been kind of brewing for a while. Any marriage is tough, but we were pretty much bi-coastal and we didn't have a chance to spend a lot of of time together. I think our feelings kind of changed. A friend of Halle's told People magazine why they thought it didn't work. Quote, she's madly in love with him, but David wanted a wife and she was always off making movies. When David and the Braves were headed to the World Series, Halle was filming a movie, but was, quote, glued to her television set, yet, quote, was sad because she wasn't with him when it happened. At one point, they were so in love. I mean, they both had each other's names tattooed on themselves. David had Halle tattooed on his arm, and Halle had David tattooed on her derriere. What's more in love than that? So the same media that clamored over them as the it couple was also a tool in their divorce. We learned that Halle filed in California first, and a few weeks later, David filed in Georgia. And by summer of '96, news dropped that David was suing Halle for alimony. He said, quote, I figured since she wants to take all of my money, I should turn around and do the same to her. Now, they both obviously wanted to control the narrative around their divorce. So David went to Ebony Men magazine with an exclusive interview. There he said he, quote, doesn't like to put my business in the street, and then proceeded to, quote, set the record straight. He said, quote, every time you look up, she's giving interviews on our relationship, trying to make me out to be this bad guy while she is constantly making herself look like this fallen angel. He went on to say, quote, if she is such a great person, why does everybody walk out of her life? Ooh. To People magazine, he said, quote, she wasn't the same person I was with before we got married. She'd get mad when I watched ESPN. And every time she saw a picture of me with a woman, any woman who might have been standing by my side, she thought I was cheating. She carried a lot of baggage from her previous relationships. She was always suspicious. I've never known a girl who could throw a tantrum like she does. Meanwhile, Halle talked several times to Ebony magazines and plenty of others. She alluded that David accused her of cheating on him. She said David would show up, quote, unannounced, and demanded she let him in order to pick up his things. And if she didn't, quote, he would break every one of the windows. So naturally, she filed a restraining order the very next day, because now we are trying to get very violent, allegedly. But, I mean, through all of this, she held on to the hope that they would be able to get back together. Quote, I'd be lying if I said there were not times when I didn't hope that David would wake up and say, let me go get my wife back. But she'd realize that wouldn't happen, and that actually sent her to a dark place. Overcome with the hurt from the end of the marriage, Halle sat in the garage in her car with her dogs. She thought about ending it all until she had this thought, quote, I had an image of my mother finding me. She admitted she really didn't want to unalive herself, but instead, quote, end the pain from the breakup. The divorce dragged on for over a year, but by summer of 1997, the marriage between David Justice and Halle Berry was officially over. How the divorce wrapped was confidential, so we'll probably never know. But honestly, before both of them met and began to date, they had gotten out of bad relationships with their exes. David had recently ended an 8-year relationship, and I already told y'all about some of the relationships Halle was in, so perhaps they were both so eager for a relationship that they glossed past a few of the foundational pieces of information that was needed to truly make it a success. Now, afterwards, Halle kicked it with Shmar Moore a few times and then went on to marry twice to Eric Benet and Olivier Martinez, each marriage lasting about 3 years before, of course, ending. She had 2 children and is currently dating musician Van Hunt. Will she marry again? In 2011, she said, quote, I wish I had known then that I was not the marrying kind. It would have saved me a lot of time, heartache, and grief over the years. But she's always going to be a romantic. She told Ebony, quote, I'm not going to give up on love because I made some bad decisions. I just have to take every lesson that I've learned from this experience and apply it. And as for David, well, he married again in 2001, this time to entrepreneur Rebecca Villalobos. And they had 3 children, but he was still pissed off by how the media portrayed him in his marriage and divorce divorce to Halle after Halle and Olivier divorced in 2015. So this is about 18 years after Halle and David divorced. David said, quote, "So many years ago, I didn't say anything about the accusations that I abused her, but now I have 3 children, ages 15, 13, and 11, 2 boys and 1 girl, and they can read this stuff, and they have friends who will read it as well. So I had to finally come out and say, once and for all, I never hit Halle Berry. Back then it didn't matter, but it's different now. Halle never said I hit her, but she never said I didn't either, which was disappointing." As an elementary age kid back then, I actually remember those rumors that David beat Halle. This was likely playground gossip, but perhaps that shows how far and wide those allegations actually went. But they're both decades past all of that whirlwind love and the swift downfall afterwards, and seemingly happy enough on the other side. So good for them. And that, Outrunners, concludes the love story of David Justice and Halle Berry. Don't forget to become an Outrunner on Patreon. Follow I'll Tell You What everywhere. Head to I'llTellYouWhat.com to see all the love stories that we've covered so far. And of course, come back for another love story. We're continuing our Booze and Baseball series next week with another legend of the sport. I can't wait to tell you all about it. See you in the pews.